Some time ago, we finished a series, which we called the Maslow Butterfly Swarm. We were summarizing that the digital reformation would require a new monetary system and a new welfare system at the same time, since the foundation of added value was shifting. We weren't surprised, as the digital revolution became more and more tangible, and people slowly started to realize what impact it would have had on their daily lives. That experts popped up like mushrooms and claimed that a universal basic income would be the perfect fit to tackle all the challenges which were lying ahead, which were mainly to prevent social harassment and social turmoils. They still saw the state as the guarantor of social peace, if it could only impose the reformation of the social system by the implementation and enforcement of new laws and regulations. But this hope slowly but surely eroded when new global forces in the form of unprecedented monopolies demonstrated that states were no longer in power, and legal frameworks did not stop these cartels from imposing their visions of a future. On the contrary, at a closer look, it became obvious that those cartels even benefited from these frameworks, since the employment of lawyers did mean expanding their competencies. At the same time, financing these lawyers provided a good opportunity to write off some profits, in order to reduce tax payments, which they weren't even paying ironically. The very same lawyers enabled these global acting companies to find and exploit national loopholes within the corresponding guidelines to the max. What was even more crucial was the fact that the state wasn't able to impose appropriate taxes on the incomes of these cartels. Although the use of robots and artificial intelligence increased the accumulation of equity, knowledge and revenues, nation-states weren't able to channel these cash flows at least partly into projects for the common good of society, which the universal basic income was actually meant to be. There was no money left to subsidize these endeavors, or at least the public was suddenly depending on the philanthropic will of these new powers. What made the situation even worse was that the whole digital infrastructure wasn't a common good anymore, either. It was nothing but private assets of the very same cartels. As the cartels also invested heavily in renewable energies and erected their own power plants to supply their facilities, nation-states had no means in order to improve their negotiation position. These cartels were not only providing autonomous gadgets, they were fully fledged autonomous themselves. As the common people started to realize that products weren't the key to a welfare state, but the infrastructure itself, which serves as the backbone of the supply chain, the shock was unmistakable. Those who once were laughing and making jokes about the ridiculous tasks, like maintaining roads, or those who have downplayed the sell-off of telecommunications, were suddenly the biggest propagators of ambitions to reconquering these old building blocks of infrastructures, and on top of that, reconquering the digital backbones as well. But it was too late. The state had no solution to offer, since its legal frameworks enabled these developments in the first place. They couldn't react fast enough. It had taken too many debates to change the framework, and lobbies would have made sure that their interests had been aligned with the interests of corresponding politicians in no time. Both together made it impossible to react appropriately. It became more and more apparent that the state was no longer the guarantor of social equality. As the situation worsened through the tense global economic relationships, what was spurred by the fact that incomes no longer increased and consumption levels stagnated, Everybody knew that an atomic war was unthinkable in order to release some pressure of the global system. As a result, the tensions within societies rose continually. Here and there outbursts of anger occurred which were quickly mitigated by media and ridiculous statements by the state. But everybody knew it was just a matter of time until the next outburst was erupting, and they were occurring in ever shorter time frames. Suddenly societies were on the brink of a global civil war. In retrospect, it is sometimes easier to identify the reasons why certain developments happened and to decipher the logic of historic events. Especially since almost everything is documented in some sort of server farm or decentralized network. Nonetheless, quick conclusions that might appear logically and reasonable should always be looked at with a critical mind, always ready and willing for adjustments and readjustments. It is even more baffling, though, that here and there, single humans, or a collective of humans, were able to do the unthinkable and understood the logic correctly. The easiest way to do this is probably to conceive scenarios, so there is some leeway for the events that might occur. In some sense, Karl Marx made use of that leeway when he assumed that there would be a shift from the so-called capitalistic system to a new system he wasn't able to imagine. He wasn't able to imagine the technological means by which the next system was introduced. However, it appears that he had sensed the necessity that capitalism had to be transformed like it had transformed previous social structures, and that this transformation would be even more pivotal than the Industrial Revolution. Karl Marx enlightened the world by introducing the thought that the value we are willing to pay for goods, in the form of money or other goods, was the expression of the appreciation of time. Strictly speaking, he called it working hours. The riddle that Aristotle couldn't solve because of his restricted view, due to his spoiled childhood as an aristocrat, he didn't understand what working hours meant, as he couldn't realize how it felt to be a slave, was finally solved. What Karl Marx couldn't envision was that the separation of value and time could be dissolved by technological means. For him, it was unthinkable that something could be exchanged as fast as light from one place to any other place on the planet. He didn't know computers or decentralized networks that would provide the infrastructure to distribute values through the deployment of protocols like Bitcoin or second-layer technologies like Lightning. Nonetheless, he sensed that capitalism, as beautiful, attractive and powerful it was, would be overcome or transformed one day like other cultural and social systems had been transformed before. He was convinced that a mental shift was necessary, but at the same time acknowledged that this shift alone wouldn't be sufficient in order to disrupt capitalism. Probably, this was partly the reason why he finally retreated from the political movements at his time and focused on analyzing the system in order to maybe come up with an engineered solution. If Karl Marx had lived during the times when the first blockchain in the form of Bitcoin was established, he probably would have been convinced that the dawn of a new age was on the horizon. He would have realized that the basic requirement in order to overcome the capitalist systems was at the fingertips of humanity. The fundamental layer, the exploitation of working hours, was about to be disrupted in a way that would change the conception of work in general, thoroughly. The vanguards of this change were social media cartels that we described in our previous explanations. These platforms enabled the monetization of any kind of attention that we literally paid to something. Each second that we spent in our free time or during work browsing through the internet was suddenly valuable. Each second flows drip by drip into the accumulating vast data ponds which powered the algorithmic turbines, which delivered the energy for accurate predictions of our behavior and our needs, which were fed back into the sustainment of the loop of consumption. Michael Ende's fiction Momo, staring the men in grey, and time-saving banks, seems pretty accurate in the eyes of those time-saving social cartels. These platforms did not only reconstitute some sort of digital aristocracy, but also inevitably introduced the uprising of the cypherpunk movement, since more and more people realized that they were suddenly the product. If they were giving their data time away for free, which were poured into the lakes, the only way to gain one's time value sovereignty back was through encrypting one's digital self. The more privacy was embedded into the code of the decentralized protocols, the more people started to embrace these new ways of communication and value transfer, the more the foundations of the digital monopolies were destroyed. Those who once disrupted industry branches and challenged the sovereignty of nation-states were now disrupted. Of course, this was also a byproduct of the exponential increase in the information exchange rates. Although the disruption made it possible that people and nation-states gained back their digital sovereignty, the monetary sovereignty wasn't re-established, since now it was impossible to declare taxes and fees by a central entity that represented the interests of the public, like central banks once claimed to do. Decentralized protocols, like Bitcoin, were unparalleled in their nature of being censorship-resistant. The only way to declare taxes or fees was via the infrastructure itself. The manufacturers and maintainers of the infrastructure were those who had the means to impose fees. But this didn't mean that they were also those who decided about the actual value of those fees. It was the coders who designed the algorithms which adjusted the values in proportion of the workload. This workload was then influenced by the popularity of use, the classic demand in market economies. But as the protocols were open source, and anybody could create their own chain, suddenly popularity became the hinge, what decided whether or not a chain would succeed. And as everybody knows, the best way to acquire popularity is to tell a sustainable story that is derived from an unshakable core of truth. This truth is a certain celestial aesthetic that is represented in broken and unbroken symmetries. This aesthetic is the driving force in all disciplines we apply to express life. As manifold and colorful as the rainbow, art, science, religions, engineering, every tool that we perceive represents this aesthetic. Some more, which inspire others to copy them, some less, which inspire others to improve those ideas. This was the actual shift. It was the peer-reviewed evaluation of aesthetic ideas. The architects of the new world had become pop stars, like their analog equivalents. They were pop influencers. But the best part was yet to come. As the best architects qualify themselves through a holistic approach, the final stage of architectural evolution was the meltdown of the virtual and real world, the combination of decentralized networks in the form of blockchain and cooperatives. If we look back today, we can smile and laugh relieved of pressure, fear and pain, which some of us had to endure during those times of the great transformation. But it was worth it. We saved the planet. We saved the future of our children and families. We saved the hope and love which humans can express in so many wonderful ways. Maybe we saved the most exceptional and most precious opportunity in the universe. The opportunity for life to continue in existence.